Welcome to Miss Retro Reads. We continue with the Tuesday Night Club. Ingots of Gold. I do not know that this story that I am going to tell you is a fair one, said Raymond West, because I can't give you the solution of it. Yet the facts were so interesting and so curious that I should like to propound it to you as a problem. And perhaps between us we may arrive at some logical conclusion. The date of these happenings was 2 years ago, when I went down to spend Whitsuntide with a man called John Newman in Cornwall. Cornwall? Said Joyce sharply. Yes, why? Nothing, only it's odd. My story is about a place in Cornwall, too, a little fishing village called Rathole. Don't tell me yours is the same. No, my village is called Pulpron. It is situated on the west coast of Cornwall, a very wild and rocky spot. I had been introduced a few weeks previously, and had found him a most interesting companion, a man of intelligence and independent means. He was possessed of a romantic imagination. As a result of his latest hobby, he had taken the lease of a pole house. He was an authority on Elizabethan times, and he described to me in vivid and graphic language the rout of the Spanish Armada. So enthusiastic was he that one could almost imagine that he had been an eyewitness at the scene. Is there anything in the reincarnation? I wonder. I very much wonder. You are so romantic, Raymond dear, said Miss Marple, looking at him. Romantic is the last thing that I am, said Raymond West, slightly annoyed. But this fellow Newman, he was quite romantic, and he interested me for that reason as a curious survival of the past. It appears that a certain ship belonging to the Armada, and known to contain a vast amount of treasure in the form of gold from the Spanish Main, was wrecked off the coast of Cornwall on the famous and treacherous Serpent Rocks. For some years, so Newman told me, attempts had been made to solve the ship and recover the treasure. I believe such stories are not uncommon, and though the number of mythical treasure ships is largely in excess of the genuine ones. A company had been formed, but had gone bankrupt, and Newman had been able to buy the rights of the thing, or whatever you call it, and for a mere song. He waxed very enthusiastic about it all. According to him, it was merely a question of the latest scientific, up-to-date machinery. The gold was there, and he had no doubt whatever that it could be recovered. It occurred to me that I listened to him how often things happen that way. A rich man such as Newman succeeds almost without effort, and yet in all probability the actual value in money of his find would mean little to him. I must say that his ardor infected me. I saw galleons drifting up the coast, flying before the storm, beaten and broken on the black rocks. The mere word galleon has a romantic sound. The phrase Spanish gold thrills the schoolboy, and the grown-up man also. Moreover, I was working at the time upon a novel, some scenes of which were laid in the 16th century, and I saw the prospect of getting valuable local color from my host. I set off that Friday morning from Paddington in high spirits, and looking forward to my trip. The carriage was empty except for one man who sat facing me in the opposite corner. He was a tall, soldierly-looking man, and I could not rid myself of the impression that somewhere or other I had seen him before. I cudgelled my brains for some time in vain, but at last I had it. My travelling companion was Inspector Badgeworth, and I had run across him when I was doing a series of articles on the Everson disappearance case. I recalled myself to his notice, and we were soon chatting pleasantly enough. When I told him I was going to Pulfram, he remarked that that was a rum coincidence, because he himself was also bound for that place. I did not want to seem inquisitive, so was careful not to ask him what took him there. Instead, I spoke of my own interest in the place, and mentioned the wrecked Spanish galleon. To my surprise, the inspector seemed to know all about it. "That will be the Juan Fernandez," he said. "Your friend won't be the first who has sunk money trying to get money out of her. It is a romantic notion." "And probably the whole story is a myth," I said. "No ship was ever wrecked there at all." "Oh, the ship was sunk there, right enough," said the inspector, "along with a good company of others. You would be surprised if you knew how many wrecks there are on the part of the coast. As a matter of fact, that is what takes me down there now. That is where the Otranto was wrecked about 6 months ago." "I remember reading about it," I said. "No lives were lost, I think." "No lives were lost," said the inspector. "But something else was lost. It is not generally known, but the Otranto was carrying bullion." "Yes?" I said, much interested. "Naturally, we have had divers at work on salvage operations, but the gold has gone, Mr. West." "Gone?" I said, staring at him. "How can it have gone?" "That is the question," said the inspector. "The rocks tore a gaping hole into its strong room. It was easy enough for the divers to get in that way, but they found the strong room empty. The question is, was the gold stolen before the wreck or afterwards? Was it even in the strong room at all?" "It seems a curious case," I said. "It is a very curious case when you consider what bullion is, not a diamond necklace that you could put into your pocket. When you think how cumbersome it is and how bulky, well, the whole thing seems absolutely impossible. There may have been some hocus-pocus before the ship sailed, but if not, it must have been removed within the last 6 months, and I'm going down to look into the matter." I found Newman waiting to meet me at the station. He apologized for the absence of his car, which had gone to the Truro for some necessary repairs. Instead, he met me with a farm lorry belonging to the property. I swung myself up beside him, and we wound carefully in and out of the narrow streets of the fishing village. We went up a steep ascent, with a gradation, I should say of 1 in 5, ran a little distance along a winding lane, and turned in at the granite-pillared gates of Pole House. The place was a charming one. It was situated high up in the cliffs, with a good view out to sea. Part of it was some 300 or 400 years old, and a modern wing had been added. Behind it farming land of about 7 or 8 acres ran inland. "Welcome to Pole House," said Newman, "and to the sign of the Golden Galleon," and he pointed to where, over the front door, hung a perfect reproduction of a Spanish galleon with all sails set. My first evening was a most charming and instructive one. My host showed me the old manuscripts relating to the Juan Fernandez. He unrolled charts for me, and indicated positions on them with dotted lines, and he produced plans of diving apparatuses, which I may say mystified me utterly and completely. I told him of my meeting with Inspector Badgeworth, in which he was much interested. "They are odd people round this coast," he said reflectively. "Smuggling and wrecking is in their blood. When a ship goes down on their coast, they cannot help regarding it as lawful plunder meant for their pockets. There is a fellow here I should like you to see. He is an interesting survival." Next day dawned bright and clear. I was taken down into Pulprin, and there introduced to Newman's diver, a man called Higgins. He was a wooden-faced individual, extremely taciturn, and his contributions to the conversation were mostly non-syllable. After a discussion between them on highly technical matters, we adjourned to the Three Anchors. A tankard of beer somewhat loosened the worthy fellow's tongue. "Detective gentleman from London has come down," he grunted. "They do say that the ship that went down here last November was carrying a mortal lot of gold." "Well, she wasn't the first to go down, and she won't be the last." "Hear, hear," chimed in the landlord of the Three Anchors. That is a true word you say there, Bill Higgins. I reckon it is, Mr. Kelvin, said Higgins. I looked with some curiosity at the landlord. He was a remarkable man, dark and swarthy, with curiously broad shoulders. His eyes were bloodshot, and he had a curiously furtive way of avoiding one's glance. I suspected that this was the man of whom Newman had spoken, saying he was of interesting survival. We don't want interfering foreigners on this coast, he said somewhat truculently. Meaning the police? Asked Newman, smiling. Meaning the police and others, said Kelvin, significantly. And don't you forget it, mister. Do you know, Newman, that sounded to me very much like a threat? I said as we climbed the hill homewards. My friend laughed. Nonsense, I don't do the folk down here any harm. I shook my head doubtfully. There was something sinister and uncivilized about Kelvin. I felt that his mind might run in strange, unrecognized channels. I think I date the beginning of my uneasiness from that moment. I had slept well enough that first night, but the next night my sleep was troubled and broken. Sunday dawned dark and sullen, with an overcast sky and the threatening of thunder in the air. I am always a bad hand at hiding my feelings, and Newman noticed the change in me. What's the matter with you, West? You are a bundle of nerves this morning. I don't know, I confessed, but I have got a horrible feeling of foreboding. Oh, it's the weather. Yes, perhaps. I said no more. In the afternoon we went out in Newman's motorboat. But the rain came on with such vigor that we were glad to return to shore and change into dry clothing. And that evening my uneasiness increased. Outside the storm howled and roared. Towards 10 o'clock the tempest calmed down. Newman looked out the window. It is clearing, he said. I shouldn't wonder if it was a perfectly fine night in another half-hour. If so, I shall go out for a stroll. I yawned. I am frightfully sleepy, I said. I didn't get much sleep last night. I think that tonight I shall turn in early. This I did. On the previous night I had slept little. Tonight I slept heavily, yet my slumbers were not restful. I was still oppressed with an awful foreboding of evil. I had terrible dreams. I dreamt of dreadful abysses and vast chasms, among which I was wandering, knowing that a slip of the foot meant death. I wakened to find the hands of my clock pointing to 8 o'clock. My head was aching badly, and the terror of my night's dream was still upon me. So strongly was this so that when I went to the window and drew it up, I started back with a fresh feeling of terror. For the first time I saw, or thought I saw, was a man digging an open grave. It took me a minute or two to pull myself together, and then I realized that the grave digger was Newman's gardener, and the grave was destined to accommodate 3 new rose trees, which were lying on the turf, waiting for the moment they should be securely planted in the earth. The gardener looked up and saw me, and touched his hat. Good morning, sir. Nice morning, sir. I suppose it is, I said doubtfully, still unable to shake off completely the depression of my spirits. However, as the gardener had said, it was a certainly nice morning. The sun was shining and the sky a clear, pale blue that promised fine weather for the day. I went down to breakfast, whistling a tune. Newman had no maids living in the house. 2 middle-aged sisters who lived in a farmhouse nearby came daily to attend to his simple wants. One of them was placing the coffee-pot on the table as I entered the room. Good morning, Elizabeth, I said. Mr. Newman not down yet? He must have been out very early, sir, she replied. He wasn't in the house when we arrived. Instantly my uneasiness returned. On the 2 previous mornings Newman had come down to breakfast somewhat late, and I didn't fancy at any time He was an early riser. Moved by those forebodings, I ran up to his bedroom. It was empty, and moreover his bed had not been slept in. A brief examination of his room showed me two other things. If Newman had gone out for a stroll, he must have gone out in his evening clothes, for they were missing. I was sure now that my premonition of evil was justified. Newman had gone, as he had said he would do, for an evening stroll. For some reason or other, he had not returned. Why? Had he met with an accident, fallen over the cliff? A search must be done at once. In a few hours I had collected a large band of helpers, and together we hunted in every direction along the cliffs and on the rocks below, but there was no sign of Newman. In the end, in despair, I sought out Inspector Badgeworth. His face grew very grave. "It looks to me as if there had been foul play," he said. "There are some not over-scrupulous customers in these parts. Have you seen Kelvin, the landlord of the Three Anchors?" I said that I had seen him. "Did you know he did a turn in jail 4 years ago? Assault and battery." "It doesn't surprise me," I said. "The general opinion in this place seems to be that your friend is a bit too fond of nosing his way into things that do not concern him. I hope he has come to no serious harm." The search was continued with redoubled vigor. It was not until late that afternoon that our efforts were rewarded. We discovered Newman in a deep ditch in a corner of his own property. His hands and feet were securely fastened with rope, and a handkerchief had been thrust into his mouth, and secured there so as to prevent him crying out. He was terribly exhausted and in great pain, but after some frictioning of his wrists and ankles and a long draught from a whiskey flask, he was able to give his account of what had occurred. The weather having cleared, he had gone out for a stroll about 11 o'clock. His way had taken him some distance along the cliffs to a spot commonly known as Smuggler's Cove, owing to the large number of caves to be found there. Here he had noticed some men unloading something from a small boat, and had strolled down to see what was going on. Whatever the stuff was, it seemed to be of great weight, and it had been carried into one of the furthermost caves. With no real suspicion of anything being amiss, nevertheless Newman had wondered. He had drawn quite near, when without being observed, suddenly there was a cry of alarm, and immediately 2 powerful, seafaring men had set upon him and rendered him unconscious. When next he came to himself, he found himself laying on a motor vehicle of some kind, which was proceeding with many bumps and bangs, as far as he could guess, up the lane which led from the coast to the village. To his great surprise, the lorry turned in at the gate of his own house. There, after a whispered conversation between the men, they at length drew him forth and flung him into the ditch, at a spot where the depth it rendered discovery unlikely for some time. Then the lorry drove on, and he thought passed out through another gate some quarter of a mile nearer the village. He could give no description of his assailants, except that they were certainly seafaring men, and, by their speech, Cornishmen. Inspector Badgeworth was very interested. "Depend upon it that is where the stuff is hidden," he cried. "Somewhere or other it has been salvaged from the wreck, and has been stored in some lonely cave somewhere. It is known that we have searched all the caves in the Smuggler's Cove, and that we are now going further afield, and they have evidently been moving the stuff at night to a cave that has been already searched and is not likely to be searched again. Unfortunately, they have had at least 18 hours to dispose of the stuff. If they got Mr. Newman last night, I doubt if we will find any of it there by now." The inspector hurried off to make a search. He found definite evidence that the bullion had been stored as supposed, but the gold had been once more removed, and there was no clue as to its fresh hiding place. One clue there was, however, and the inspector himself pointed it out to me the following morning. That lane is very little used by motor vehicles, he said, and in one or two places we get the traces of the tires very clearly. There is a three-cornered piece out of one tire, leaving a mark which is quite unmistakable. It shows going into the gate here and there, and a faint mark of it going out of the other gate, so there is not much doubt that it is the right vehicle we are after. Now, why did they take it out through the farther gate? It seems quite clear to me that the lorry came from the village. Now, there aren't many people who own a lorry in the village, not more than 2 or 3 at most. Kelvin, the landlord of the 3 Anchors, has one. What about Kelvin's original profession? Asked Newman. It is curious that you should ask me that, Mr. Newman. In his younger days, Kelvin was a professional driver. Newman and I looked at each other. The puzzle seemed to be fitting itself together piece by piece. You didn't recognize Kelvin as one of the men on the beach? Asked the inspector. Newman shook his head. I'm afraid I can't say anything as to that, he said, regretfully. I really hadn't time to see anything. The inspector very kindly allowed me to accompany him to the 3 Anchors. The garbage was up a side street. The big doors were closed, but by going up a little alley at the side, we found a small door that led into it, and that door was open. A very brief examination of the tires sufficed for the inspector. We've got him, by Jove, he exclaimed. Here is the mark as large as life on the rear left wheel. Now, Mr. Kelvin, I don't think you will be clever enough to wriggle out of this. Raymond West came to a halt. Well, said Joyce, so far I don't see anything to make a problem about, unless they never found the gold. They never found the gold, certainly, said Raymond, and they never got Kelvin either. I expect he was too clever for them, but I don't quite see how he worked it. He was duly arrested on the evidence of the tire mark, but an extraordinary hitch arose. Just opposite the big doors of the garage was a cottage rented for the summer by a lady artist. Oh, these lady artists, said Joyce, laughing. As you say, oh, these lady artists. This particular one had been ill for some weeks, and in consequence had 2 hospital nurses attending her. The nurse who was on that night had pulled her armchair up to the window, where the blinds were up. She declared that the motor lorry could not have left the garage opposite without her seeing it, and she swore that in actual fact it never left the garage that night. I don't think that's much of a problem, said Joyce. The nurse went to sleep, of course. They always do. That has been known to happen, said Mr. Petherick, judiciously. But it seems to me that we are accepting facts without sufficient examination before accepting the testimony of the hospital nurse, and we should inquire very closely into her bona fides. The alibi, coming with such suspicious promptness, is inclined to raise doubts in my mind. There is also the lady artist's testimony, said Raymond. She declared that she was in pain and awake most of the night, and that she would certainly have heard the lorry, it being an unusual noise, and the night being very quiet after the storm. Said the clergyman. That is certainly an additional fact. Had Kelvin himself any alibi? He declared that he was at home and in bed from 10 o'clock onwards, but he could produce no witness in support of this statement. The nurse went to sleep, said Joyce, and so did the patient. Ill people always think they have never slept a wink all night. Raymond West looked inquiringly at Dr. Pender. Do you know, I feel sorry for that man, Kelvin. It seems to me very much a case of give a dog a bad name. Kelvin had been in prison. Apart from the tire mark, which certainly seems too remarkable to be a coincidence, There doesn't seem to be much against him except his unfortunate record. You, Sir Henry." Sir Henry shook his head. "As it happens," he said, smiling, "I know something about this case, so clearly I mustn't speak." "Well, go on, Aunt Jane. Haven't you got anything to say?" "In a minute, dear," said Miss Marple. "I'm afraid I have counted wrong. 2 pearl, 3 plain, slip 1, 2 pearl. Yes, that's right. What did you say, dear?" "What is your opinion?" "You wouldn't like my opinion, dear. Young people never do, I notice. It is better to say nothing." "Nonsense, Aunt Jane. Out with it." "Well, dear Raymond," said Miss Marple, laying down her knitting and looking across at her nephew, "I do think you should be more careful how you choose your friends." "You are so credulous, dear, so easily gulled." "I suppose it is being a writer and having so much imagination. All that story about Spanish galleon. If you were older and had more experience of life, you would have been on your guard at once. A man you had known only a few weeks, too." Sir Henry suddenly gave vent to a great roar of laughter and slapped his knee. "Got you this time, Raymond," he said. "Miss Marple, you are wonderful. Your friend Newman, my boy, has another name, several other names, in fact. At the present moment he is not in Cornwall, but in Devonshire. Dartmoor, to be exact, a convict in Princeton prison. We didn't catch him over the stolen bullion business, but over the rifling of a strong room of one London bank. Then we looked up his past record, and we found a good portion of the gold stolen buried in a garden at Pole House. It was rather a neat idea. All along the Cornish coast there are stories of wrecked galleons full of gold. It accounted for the diver, and it would account later for the gold. But a scapegoat was needed, and Kelvin was ideal for the purpose. Newman played his little comedy very well, and our friend Raymond, with his celebrity as a writer, made an unimpeachable witness." "But the tire marks," objected Joyce. "Oh, I saw that at once, dear, although I know nothing about motors," said Miss Marple. "People change a wheel, you know. I have often seen them doing it. And, of course, they could take a wheel off Kelvin's lorry and take it out through the small door into the alley and put it on to Mr. Newman's lorry and take the lorry out of one gate down to the beach, fill it up with the gold and bring it up through the other gate. And then they must have taken the wheel back and put it back on Mr. Kelvin's lorry, while I suppose someone else was tying up Mr. Newman in a ditch. Very uncomfortable for him, and probably longer before he was found than he expected. I suppose the man who called himself the gardener attended to that side of the business." "Why do you say called himself the gardener, Aunt Jane?" said Raymond curiously. "Well, he can't have been a real gardener, can he?" said Miss Marple. "Gardeners don't work on Whit Monday. Everybody knows that." She smiled and folded up her knitting. "It was really that little fact that put me on the right scent," she said. She looked across at Raymond. "When you are a householder, dear, and have a garden of your own, you will know these little things." The end. And we'll continue this book next Wednesday. And thanks for listening to Miss Retro Reads.